Howdy, everybody. Dr. Andy Woods here. This is Pastor's Point of View number 306. Today is June the 21st, 2024. As I said earlier, my name is Dr. Andy Woods. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. I'm back with my friend, colleague, fellow elder, associate pastor, Dr. Jim McGowan. And we have a very aggressive, as usual, pastor's point of view lined up for you today as we look at a prophecy update. You can see on the screen there the 7 categories that we're going to work our way through, and let's go ahead and start with anti-Semitism. We have a picture there of Revelation chapter 12. I hope if people get an opportunity, they will read Revelation chapter 12, verses 6 through 17. It's really an angelic description of Satan's attempt to blot out the Jewish nation.
Yes.
So that God cannot fulfill his promises of the coming kingdom through the Jewish nation.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read Revelation 12, verses 6 through 17, you'll see that as clearly as it can be seen. And this is something that's going to take place in the second half of the tribulation period. And we believe that if we're approaching that time period, then we should see anti-Semitism escalating. And in fact, that's exactly what we're seeing.
Exactly.
Right down to removing Jesus Christ from the Jewish or Hebrew picture. Making Jesus into something that he's not. He's not a Jew. He's not a Hebrew.
No.
He is a Palestinian. Or saying things like, if Jesus was going to be born today, he would be born in Gaza, not Bethlehem. This is a rewriting of the biblical narrative so that it's no longer anchored in Judaism.
Right.
And so with all of that being said, notice this particular article here from allisrael.com, June 15th, 2024. It's dealing with Bethlehem Bible College. And I think they need to just take the word Bible and cross it out, because it's not biblical what these people are proclaiming there at all. But this is a Bible college set up in the birthplace of Jesus, which has been under Palestinian control, I think, since Oslo. Mm-hmm. Bethlehem has. Mm-hmm. And they have a Bible college there, and their whole function, as far as I can tell, is to attack the state of Israel in which they reside and are dependent upon, really, for protection.
Apparently.
And essentially it's to create propaganda, theological propaganda that makes Jesus out to be something other than what the Bible actually says he was, a Hebrew. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, what's this article about?
I recently visited the Bethlehem Bible College in the hills of biblical Judea, where I saw something that shocked me. In the hallway was a large poster sponsored by Christ at the Checkpoint 2024. There was an image of a young child in a manger, accompanied by the following caption, quote, "If Jesus were born today, he would be born in Gaza under the rubble." And then that's the person that wrote that was Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac. Goes on to say in the article, the fact that this poster was discovered in the halls of the Bethlehem Bible College only lends to the absurdity of its claim. Bethlehem, not Gaza, is where the Messiah would have to be born. As Christians, we believe Jesus is the promised Messiah promised Messiah prophesied about in the Old Testament. Without Bethlehem, Christianity is dead. It shocks me that a Christian Bible college could put an agenda that denies the birthplace of Jesus. The CATA conference is notorious for promoting anti-Israel libel under the guise of Christian love, justice, and peace.
Now, this Bethlehem college, and I don't even want to call this a Bible college, but it's a theological propaganda institution.
College.
I mean, they're notorious for as the article mentions, this Christ at the Checkpoint conference where all of these kind of anti-Israel people gather, I think annually, and complain about how Israel is a genocide state and an apartheid state.
Wow.
And so part of the propaganda is sort of to de-Judaize Jesus. And you'll notice we have a larger picture of what the article is referring to. It's got the baby Jesus there as you look at this picture under a pile of rubble, trying to make it sound like, let's recruit Jesus into what's going on in Gaza.
Yeah.
Here the Israelis are going into Gaza to, root out terrorism within their own borders. And with every war, there's collateral damage. And so let's bring Jesus into that political argument, and
Right.
let's somehow link the birth of Jesus to Gaza being born under the rocks that the Jews are somehow creating. I mean,
Sanity.
Bethlehem, we'll have a map up in just a little bit, is near Jerusalem. I think just a couple miles near
Very
Jerusalem.
Yes.
And then Gaza is a completely different part of the country on the southwest portion of the map. So this attempt to link Jesus to Gaza is geographically wrong. It's biblically wrong. The guy doing this, you'll notice his name at the very bottom there. You mentioned him earlier, is Munther Isaac. And keep in mind that Tucker Carlson, notice this article here from World Israel News. This is a guy that Tucker Carlson had on his show to spill his filth and his propaganda with no Zionist present to counteract the propaganda.
How
And this is
disappointing.
kind of the... it is disappointing because Tucker Carlson's supposed to be a conservative.
Supposedly.
And you think he would know better, but this is part of the transforming David into the Goliath philosophy, where Israel's not the victim. Israel is, actually the aggressor. So let's recruit Jesus into that,
Jesus.
by rewriting the Bible.
Help us.
Here's a picture that you often see in these circles. You'll notice it's Jesus with a Arabic or Islamic, I think you call that a hijab. And in fact, I've been to Bethlehem, and when you leave, it's got a picture of Jesus like this on the wall.
Yeah.
And it says, welcome to the birthplace of Jesus. At least they got that right. And it says, we, as the Palestinians, were the first to greet him, is what it says.
But they found him under the rubble.
They found him under the rubble.
Gosh.
And I want people to understand the difference between a Christian Zionism
Yes.
and Christian Palestinianism. Notice this chart here. I took this from something that the great Dr. Paul Wilkinson wrote. I just put it in chart form. When you listen to, what's this guy's name? Munther Isaac
Yeah.
on the Tucker Carlson show, you have to understand that you're getting information about Israel and the Middle East from a Christian Palestinian perspective, which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. Our ministry does not come from that perspective. We are not Christian Palestinianists.
No, we're not.
We are Christian Zionists.
Amen.
So what's the difference? Notice this chart. First of all, the Bible, Christian Zionists would say the Bible is Jewish. Every author was Jewish,
Right.
with the potential exception of Luke. The Christian Palestinianist would come along and say, no, the Bible is a Christian document. What about the land of Israel? Well, the Christian Zionist calls it what the Bible calls it, the land of Israel, Matthew 2:21. The Christian Palestinianist calls it Palestine. Now, how about Jesus? Notice the battle that's going on related to Jesus. The Christian Zionist sees Jesus as Jewish. The Christian Palestinianist sees Jesus as Palestinian. What about the Holocaust? The Holocaust to the Christian Zionist is something to be remembered. The Christian Palestinianist looks at the Holocaust as if it's something to be resented, because that's what created worldwide sympathy for Israel to return to her homeland 1948. And what do you do with May the 14th, 1948? To the Christian Zionist, it's a miracle.
Yes. Amen.
It's a divinely orchestrated miracle on the Mediterranean. The Christian Palestinianist, sounding a lot like a Muslim at this point,
yes, thank you
calls
for
it
bringing that up.
calls it a catastrophe. I think the Muslims call it Nakba.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
A catastrophe. Now, how about the Jewish people in the land? The Christian Zionist sees the Jewish people in the land as the rightful owners.
Yes.
theologically and legally.
Yes.
Christian Palestinianist looks at them and says, no, they're illegal occupiers. What do you do with Bible prophecy? Well, the Christian Zionist sees Bible prophecy as signposts pointing to the soon return of Jesus. And that's what our show is all about, pointing these things out. The Christian Palestinianist sees Bible prophecy as some kind of moral manifesto. And the general thrust of Christian Zionism is biblical. I mean, we believe what we believe because the Bible says so. The Christian Palestinianist, by contrast, is not really interested in biblical truth, as you can see.
Exactly.
They're interested in some sort of political result. And if I have to recruit Jesus and rewrite the Jesus story, so I dislodge it from Judaism to achieve my political result, I'll do that. What would you add?
It's not really all that different from what happened back in what was around the 1700s when you had the big, or 1800s when you had the big social movement away from biblical Christianity.
There you go.
Same kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's just taken on a new name. So here is another picture, if we can put that up.
Somewhere down there.
The point of it is there's baby Jesus beneath the rubble of Gaza, which is completely rewritten. I'm not sure, Bethlehem is Gaza. In fact, I shouldn't say I'm not sure. Bethlehem is not Gaza. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. So they're trying to turn Jesus into this kind of social reformer against Israel, trying to root out, terrorism within its own borders. And when this kind of thing starts to happen, people just start rewriting the Bible. You know that anti-Semitism, is really at its peak. Here is a genealogy from Matthew's gospel. Matthew, the first gospel, is very Hebraic because it was written to Jewish Christians.
That's
it was
right.
written during a time when the church, was primarily Jewish. And Matthew has a genealogy there, and he links Jesus, first of all, back to David. And then from David, it links him all the way back to Abraham.
That's right.
And then the genealogy stops. So Matthew is very clear that Jesus was not a Gazan.
No.
He was not a Palestinian. He was as Jewish as they come. He was a physical descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yet if you have an agenda that's anti-Israel and you want to recruit the church into that agenda, you have to rewrite the biblical story and kind of dislodge Jesus from Judaism. Now, this is what we would call an anachronistic concept, Christian Palestinianism. Anachronism means outside of time.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we call this an anachronistic fallacy? Because the name Palestine wasn't even invented until the 2nd century.
Oops.
Until after the biblical story unfolded.
Yes.
And so term was created by Emperor Hadrian after Israel had been pushed out of the land in AD 70 to make it sound like there never was a Jewish presence in the land at all.
Right.
So when you start using this word Palestine, Christian Palestinianism, you're using you're falling into the anachronistic fallacy, where you're using a term or expression that didn't even exist when the biblical story historically unfolded.
Exactly right.
So that's where we are today. And as we take a look at this whole subject of anti-Semitism, focusing on the attitudes of people towards the Jewish nation, notice this contributing article here by, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Allgemeiner, and June 3rd, 2024, and the title of it is Top Diaspora Rabbi. Diaspora means Jews in the dispersion outside of their land.
Yes.
Says Israel must develop a contingency plan for Europe's Jews as anti-Semitism spreads. In other words, anti-Semitism, not only is it taking over the biblical story, but it's taking over Europe. And what this rabbi is saying is Israel needs a plan to get these Jews out of Europe because things in Europe are turning against the Jews living there. So help us with that article.
Well, I just have to make this comment.
Absolutely.
When I read this article, I wondered, has this rabbi read Revelation? The book of Revelation. I mean,
Mhm.
goodness gracious. Listen to this, folks. A top European rabbi is calling on Israel to develop a practical contingency plan for the absorption of European Jewry in Israel as anti-Semitism spreads across the continent. Quoting, "We are in a battle for the continuation of Jewish life in Europe." European Jewish Association Chairman Rabbi Menachem Margolin said last week, "Jews in traditional dress or those with mezuzahs on their doors are experiencing relentless harassment.
Wow.
Jewish students face threat to their lives and are excluded from university courses, while hate slogans are freely scrawled on Jewish homes, synagogues, and cemeteries. Anti-Semitic attitudes remain alarmingly high across Europe, particularly after Hamas's October 7 onslaught against Israel. While, with 1 in 4 Europeans harboring anti-Semitic prejudices, according to an Anti-Defamation League survey published last year before the Gaza war. Since October 7, the number of anti-Semitic incidents has skyrocketed to record highs in several countries. And the article continues, Molotov cocktails thrown at a synagogue in Germany, Stars of David sprayed at residential buildings in France, a Jewish cemetery desecrated in Austria, Jewish stores and synagogues attacked in Spain, demonstrators chanting hateful slogans against Jews, the statement noted. This sounds like Nazi
It
Germany.
sure does. It sounds like Kristallnacht,
It does.
the night of broken glass. Now, we can look at this and say, well, I'm glad that's happening in Europe and not happening here in the United
Oh, boy.
States. I mean, I'm glad this line here, while hate slogans are freely scrawled on Jewish homes and synagogues and cemeteries, I'm glad that's over in
Right,
Europe and not here.
yes.
Whoops!
Those
Looks like I spoke too quick. Notice this particular snapshot, and it's entitled "Jewish Homes in New York." What's going on here?
Jewish homes in New York have been branded with Hamas's red triangle that they use to indicate their targets for killing. And this says the Free Palestine movement is the new Nazi movement, no doubt about it.
So this subject of anti-Semitism, which the Bible indicates will envelop the earth in the last days. I mean, are we not seeing this before our very eyes?
We really are.
We're seeing it in Europe.
Yeah.
We're seeing it in New York. We're seeing it in Bethlehem,
Mm-hmm.
in a so-called Bible college that's trying to rewrite the biblical story
Wow.
to dislodge Jesus from his Hebraic roots. And I don't know what to say about this other than "Come, Lord Jesus." I mean,
Yes.
this is unbelievable. The things
Yes.
that we're seeing. With all of that being said, let's go to our second bullet point, and it has to do with the world against Israel. Here we're moving away from attitudes of people towards the Jewish nation to the posture of the nations against the Jewish nation. And a couple of go-to scriptures that we frequently use on this subject are 2 from the prophet Zechariah. So what do those say?
Zechariah 12:3, reading from the New American Standard 95 Update. "It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it." And then later in chapter 14, Zechariah 14:2 and 3, "For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half of the city exiled. But the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle."
I mean, and you ask yourself, post 1948, when the world, even the UN at that time, was largely on the side of Israel,
Yeah.
because they came out of the Holocaust and the world felt sympathetic for Israel. How could world sympathy at that point turn against the Jewish nation? It seemed like an impossibility, and yet that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't surprise us, because Zechariah writing 500 years before the first coming of Christ, said it would happen.
Yes, it
And
did.
you don't have to look far to see the nations of every sort turning against the Jewish nation. In fact, ever since the events of October the 7th and Israel's desire to defend herself in Gaza, it's almost like they're all piling on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So notice this particular article from Reuters, June 3rd, 2024, UN experts, well, there's a scary term right there.
Boy.
UN experts
Yeah.
urge, look at the language, all
Yeah.
countries. Isn't
Yeah.
that what Zechariah indicated would
Yes.
happen? UN experts urge all countries to recognize Palestinian statehood. So what's happening here?
A group of United Nations experts called on Monday for all countries to recognize a Palestinian state to ensure peace in the Middle East. The call came less than a week after Spain, Ireland, and Norway officially recognized a Palestinian state, prompting anger from Israel, which has found itself increasingly isolated after nearly 8 months of war in Gaza. And it goes on to say, Israel has repeatedly condemned moves to recognize a Palestinian state, saying they bolster Hamas, the militant Islamic group that led the deadly October 7 attack on Israel, which sparked the Israeli offensive in the Gaza Strip.
So let's just get all this straight.
Yeah.
Israel gave back the Gaza Strip to the Gazans, I guess we'll call them, the Palestinians, whatever you want to call them, in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
In 2005, they had their only election, where they elected Hamas. And ever since that point in time, they've used the Gaza Strip, which is in the southwest portion of the map, a little tiny strip, southwest portion of Israel. They've used that as a beachhead to launch terrorist attacks into the land of Israel, culminating in the horrific events of October 7th.
Yes.
So here's Israel going into the Gaza Strip, not to destroy the Gaza Strip or to destroy the Palestinians, but to root out Hamas.
Makes sense to me.
And so as Israel does this, the world community wants to act like Israel is committing genocide, apartheid, some kind of war crime.
Yeah.
And here the United Nations is saying, if we just embraced a two-state solution, it would fix everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's remind people what the two-state solution is. We've got a few maps on this. What they're talking about there, if we can put up map number 1, is the West Bank. If Israel would just give that up, it would stop events like October the 7th. Here is a second map. We do not use the word West Bank any more than we use the word Palestine, because you don't find the word West Bank in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a Bible translation where Jesus says, you're going to be my disciples in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the remote parts of the earth, Acts 1:8, you better consult a different Bible translation.
That's not in my Bible.
Because the Bible uses the expression Judea and Samaria. It's that lighter brown area. Give up that and we'll have peace, even though Israel gave up the Gaza Strip, southwest portion of the map, darker brown, and it created terror. So that's the insanity of what Israel is being asked to do. And it's not just a nation or two that's asking this. The whole world wants this to happen.
Yeah.
Notice this particular map here. We've used this before. The green area represents Islamic dictatorship theocracies threatening to drive Israel into the Mediterranean Sea. In fact, it's in their own charters in most of these nations.
True.
And that little red dot equals Israel, and the world community thinks if Israel just gave up a little bit more territory, peace would break out. That's the kind of insanity.
That was the exact word I was going to use, insanity.
That Israel is being pressured and placed under. So this is an example of what Zechariah said would happen in the last days. And as these are happening, it shows us where we are on God's divine calendar. Speaking of the nations turning against Israel, Israel just did a wonderful rescue operation.
Yes.
Where it talks there about Israel welcoming home 4 Israeli hostages.
Yeah.
And while normal people would celebrate that, what does the world community do? They start to condemn Israel.
Yeah.
So notice this article from worldisraelnews.com, June 9th, 2024. It's entitled Appalling. What a great title. The EU, European Union, and the UN, United Nations, slam who? Slam Israel.
Yeah.
Slam the Israeli rescue mission. So
Wow.
what's going on here?
Senior European Union and United Nations officials condemned the Israeli rescue mission in Gaza, which led to the freeing of 4 captives held since the Hamas invasion of October 7. European Union High Representative of Foreign Affairs Joseph Borrell slammed the Israeli operation, which facilitated the captives' return, calling it an appalling massacre and a bloodbath. Quoting, anyway, goes on, it says, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, echoed Borrell's comments, writing on Twitter or X that she was, quote, relieved that 4 hostages have been released, while criticizing the Israeli operation. She goes on to say that she called the operation an act of genocide and humanitarian camouflage. This is humanitarian camouflage at another level.
So Israel does a rescue operation, gets 4 hostages free, and the EU, global organization,
Yeah.
the United Nations, a global organization, condemn Israel for how she did it. I mean, this is so common in the news.
Unbelievable.
Israel is blamed for everything in the eyes of world bodies and world media. So this is just an outworking of Zechariah's prophecies. And look at this article here from, well, actually, before we get to that particular article, let's put up the World Times. And this has to do with Benjamin Netanyahu. It says, breaking, Israel is considering leaving the United Nations. Well, who could blame him?
Amen
And
to
can
that.
you read that excerpt there from
Absolutely.
the World Times?
Quoting Netanyahu here, within days, Israel will study the possibility of expelling senior United Nations officials from its territory, he told Israeli public radio. The time has come for Israel to seriously consider the pros and cons of withdrawing from the United Nations.
Now, on a prior PPOV, we quoted the Israeli envoy says America should think about doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But they are, as we speak, contemplating leaving the United Nations. Why would they want to leave the United Nations? Because the body is decidedly anti-Israel.
Yes, it is.
Largely because of what's called the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which has a massive voting bloc in the United Nations. So why would they want to leave the United Nations? Because the world is against Israel, like Zechariah said
Exactly.
would happen.
Exactly, yes.
And even places where Israelis took their vacations, they can't go anymore.
Once again, yeah.
Now here's an article related to Maldives. And this comes from timesofisrael.com, June 2nd, 2024. Maldives says it will ban Israelis from entering the country, citing the Gaza war.
The Maldives government will ban Israelis from the Indian Ocean archipelago, known for luxury resorts, as public anger in the predominantly Muslim nation rises over the war in Gaza. The president's office said that the cabinet decided to change laws to prevent Israeli passport holders from entering the country and to establish a subcommittee to oversee the process. Nearly 11,000 Israelis visited Maldives last year, which was 0.6% of the total tourist arrivals. The Maldives government will ban Israelis from the Indian Ocean archipelago, known for luxury resorts, as public anger in the predominantly Muslim nations rise over the war in Gaza.
Now, isn't that racial discrimination?
I would say so, yes.
I mean, when you're passing laws saying this race is not allowed in, this nation, ethnicity is not allowed in, I mean, haven't we in our country made a big issue out of racial discrimination being wrong?
Oh, yes.
So where is the outcry against this?
Amen,
It doesn't
brother.
exist.
Amen.
I mean, racism is wrong, and it should be wrong. Racial
Yes.
discrimination is wrong against anybody
Mm-hmm.
except the Jews.
Apparently.
Then it's okay.
Satanic.
Has human nature really changed since biblical times? I mean, we've had 2,000 years to get over these anti-Semitic thoughts, haven't we? But
Mm-hmm.
what does Acts 18 and verse 2 say?
Acts 18:2. And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome, and he came to them.
So, what did Solomon say? There's nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun.
I mean, never expect Israel to get a fair shake ever, because the war against Israel is satanic and demonic.
That's it. That's it.
And what was happening in biblical times with Rome, excluding the Jews from Rome, is being replicated in modern times. I mean, we are doing things to Jews that we in enlightened Western civilization would not do to any racial group whatsoever.
Right.
But for some reason, it's okay to do it to Israel.
Well, can I make a comment
Absolutely.
quickly? You know, the thing that just really just jumps out at me is that, you know, it brings to my mind how Satan hates God, but he can't touch God. He can't do anything to God. So he goes after God's people.
Amen to that.
Mm.
So we not only have anti-Semitic attitudes and thoughts towards the Jews, but we have the posture of the nation against the Jews.
Yep.
Let's go to our third bullet point here. We want to bring people up to speed, if we could, on the Gog Magog in alignment. I'm going to make a few comments about Russia, Iran, and North America, and you may wonder, how do we know that Russia, Iran, and North America? North Africa is what I meant to say, are mentioned in the Gog Magog scenario. I have a book called The Middle East Meltdown where I explain all of this to people, and
yes.
it requires too long of an explanation, you know, given our time constraints here. But notice, first of all, this map. You notice that we have Persia or Iran circled, because Iran, Ezekiel 38 and 39, is one of the invaders into the land of Israel in the last days. You notice that we have Put or Libya, Cush or the Sudan circled. Why do we have them circled? Because Ezekiel 38 and 39 indicates that those parts of the globe, the map, will cooperate with Iran in invading Israel. And one of the criticisms I've heard is, you know, we're a long way away from Ezekiel 38 and 39 because North Africa is not falling into place. Well, we've done a lot of shows recently where we've talked about how North Africa is exactly where Ezekiel said they would be at the end of the age, cooperating with Iran and Russia. And as you can see from the map, right next door to Libya and almost next door to the Sudan is Niger. We have Niger circled. So Niger, maybe she's a player, maybe she's not, but she certainly has an influence there in North Africa.
Right.
And so what you're starting to see is the development of an alliance between Persia and nearby Niger. So with all of that being said, notice this article from the Jerusalem Post, June 10th, 2024. Iran bought 300 tons of uranium from Niger for illicit nuke weapons program. Now, we've talked about how Iran is on the precipice of, if she hasn't already, crossing the nuclear finish line. I mean, that's no front page news. I think what's interesting is where Iran or Persia is buying this uranium from. They're buying it from North Africa. Ezekiel says North Africa and Iran will play a role in invading Israel in the last days.
Sure does.
So things are falling completely into prophetic alignment. Wow. At any rate, help us with that article.
The Islamic Republic of Iran purchased 300 tons of refined uranium from Niger in a secret deal that is part of Tehran's drive to amass the resources for the construction of a nuclear weapons device. The London-based independent news organization Iran International published a report in early June about Iran's clandestine negotiations with Niger's junta government. Iran reached an agreement with Niger to produce 300 tons of yellow cake in exchange for the delivery of drones and surface-to-air missiles to Niger, wrote Iran International. Yellow cake is a term used to describe concentrated uranium, a yellow-looking powder used to manufacture weapons-grade uranium for atomic weapons. And the article continues, the disclosure about the Iran-Niger uranium deal coincides with former Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman declaring that Iran seeks a nuclear holocaust targeting the lone Jewish state.
So what's Iran going to do with this uranium, Brother Jim? Well, the article starts to explain it, doesn't it?
Sure does. Lieberman told Army Radio last week that Iran is, quote, planning a holocaust for us in the next 2 years.
Wow.
He continued, we are in the midst of an Iranian extermination program, the head of the Yisrael Beitenu party chairman said. Lieberman noted, quote, Israel will be attacked to destroy it from several fronts with tens of thousands of missiles at the same time. They are planning a holocaust for us in the next 2 years. Member states of the International Atomic Energy Agency rebuked Iran on Wednesday for its lack of cooperation with agency inspectors. On Friday, the British, French, and German governments forwarded a letter to the United Nations Security Council outlining Iran's violations of the 2015 nuclear deal. However, the European countries and the U.S. have not triggered the snapback UN sanctions against Tehran for its ongoing violations of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. The Trump administration withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the formal name for the Iran nuclear deal, in 2018. Trump called it a horrible deal that does not permanently stop Iran's nuclear weapons program.
So here is Iran planning Holocaust 2.0.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, that's
Openly.
Now, that fits exactly what Ezekiel said would happen, right?
Yes.
How Iran would be part of this invading force into the land of Israel, Ezekiel 38 and 39. Number two, Iran now is acquiring the means to do this because they're about ready, if they haven't already, crossed the nuclear finish line or about ready to cross it. And then number three, they're getting their material to build their weapons of mass destruction, which will be used in this Holocaust, from Niger, which is right next to Cush and Put, two of the invaders from North Africa into the land of Israel.
Wow.
Gee, Brother Jim, how many times in my life can I be struck by lightning?
Bring it.
It's just unreal how
Yes.
the alliances are in place, the right nations are in place.
Yep.
The motive is in place, and that's why we find these types of articles very interesting. Now, notice this citation from Wilhelm Gesenius, who says that Rosh in Ezekiel 38 is undoubtedly the Russians. Let's see if we can put Gesenius's quote up. Do you mind reading that?
All right. He says this proper name is a proper name of a northern nation mentioned with Tubal and Meshech, undoubtedly the Russians, who are mentioned by the Byzantine writers of the 10th century under the name the Ross, dwelling to the north of Taurus and dwelling on the river Ra.
And the reason I keep using this Gesenius quote is a lot of people criticize our view that Russia is what Ezekiel 38 and 39 was speaking of.
Right.
This Rosh coming from the remote north. People say, oh, you don't have any linguistic basis for this. Well, yes, we do. Gesenius was the father of modern-day lexicography, which is the science and art of compiling Hebrew dictionaries. He's not a lightweight.
No.
I can assure you of that. And beyond that, he made this statement in 1847. This is probably a
Yeah.
reprint. He could have made this as early as 1842, some say. Russia was a Christian Orthodox country at that time.
Sure was.
And wasn't going to invade Israel, let alone the modern state of Israel, since the modern state of Israel didn't even exist in 1842.
That's right.
But Cassinius said the Bible means what it says and says what it means, and keep your eye on Russia because Russia is going to invade Israel. Well, what's happened since Cassinius passed off the scene? Number one, the Communist Revolution occurred in Russia in 1917.
Yep.
Number two, Israel was reborn. Number three,
Wow.
there has been growing tension between the two nations ever since.
Yep.
Cassinius, if he were alive today, would probably be put on the Amazon bestseller list as a
Every talk show, right?
modern day prophet.
Yeah.
And so keep your eye on Russia. Now, notice this map that we have here. It's got Russia and Iran circled because the two of them will invade Israel in the last days. Now, doesn't that mean that Russia and Iran, just like Iran and North Africa, would start to cooperate with each other?
They have to at some point.
And so look at this particular article here. It relates to this plane crash that just took place in Iran, where the number 2 and the number 3 man were killed in the plane crash. The title of it is Russian-Iran Ties Hit Unexpected Snag. Wait a minute, you mean there's Russian and Iran ties?
That means they already exist.
They
right?
already exist. And snag means it's just a little bump in the road, not a U-turn. So when you see headlines like this, you should be thinking Ezekiel 38 and 39, right?
That's right.
So what does this article say?
Russia has rolled back on comments suggesting that a major agreement with Iran had been suspended due to problems it faced with Tehran. Since the start of the war in Ukraine in February 2022, Tehran has supplied Moscow's war machine with equipment such as the Shahed drone, which has been used to attack Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. In September of that year, work on a new treaty between Moscow and Tehran was announced during a meeting between Putin and the late president of the Islamic Republic, Ibrahim Raisi. Russia's foreign minister had said in January that the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty was in the final stages of being agreed and signed by Putin and Raisi. But after the death of Raisi and other officials in a helicopter crash in May, it appears that the agreement has been delayed. But
Delayed but not denied.
yes, but
Postponed but not canceled.
that's right. Hamidreza Azizi, a research fellow at German think tank SWP Berlin, told Newsweek last month that Raisi's death did not mean any substantial change in the strategic direction of Iran's foreign policy, such as its nuclear program and the confrontation with Israel over the war in Gaza.
So the article at the end here quotes this research fellow and analyst from Germany saying Raisi's death, the plane crash.
Yeah.
And by the way, the UN had a moment of silence for this guy.
Yeah,
This guy's nickname is the Butcher of Tehran.
that's right.
He didn't get that name accidentally.
No, he did not.
It would be like having a moment of silence for Adolf Hitler.
Exactly right.
So Raisi's death did not mean any substantial change in the strategic direction of Iran's foreign policy. In other words, the alignment between Rosh and Persia has been going on for a long time, like Ezekiel said it would,
Yep.
against all odds. And any little hiccups in Iran, such as the death of the number 2 and the number 3 guy, I think the number 2 and the number 3 guy are sort of irrelevant. It's the Ayatollah that really holds the strings of power there.
Right.
Any potential disruption, people might think, because of this plane crash, we're dealing here just with a little hiccup. Things are right on course. Things are right on schedule.
Well, it actually might even be clearing the way for things to move faster.
I think that's
know?
the right way to understand a lot of these things, is what we think are delays are actually, the devil putting his foot on the accelerator
Mhm.
is what I think is
Yeah,
happening.
I think so.
Now, notice this particular map here where we have Rosh or Russia alone circled. And Russia apparently is going to spearhead this invasion. And if we're living in the season when these things will transpire, we would expect to see Russia
Mhm.
developing sort of a bellicose, belligerent mindset, starting to roll over countries, for example, that she's not supposed to roll over, like she did with Georgia,
Just like in the past, yeah.
like she recently did with Crimea, and then most recently, just like she did with Ukraine.
Mhm.
And we would expect to see, if Ezekiel's prophecies are correct, and they are, Russia to develop in the last days as sort of a regional power
Mhm.
with global ambitions.
Right.
And that's exactly what we're watching
Yeah.
happen in the news constantly. Notice this particular headline from Fox News. You mind reading that headline?
Putin's fleet of warships in Cuba
What?
is direct warning to Biden, experts say. Putin has threatened to arm America's adversarial neighbors.
Now, wasn't there this thing called the Cuban Missile Crisis where Russia started doing things like this, and it
Yes,
almost
I remember it.
brought us to the brink of war?
Yeah.
Well, it's almost like history is recycling, where an entire fleet of warships in Cuba is now there.
Yeah.
I mean, is Russia flexing her muscles or what? Here is another screenshot. This taken from X, and what does that headline say?
Russia is planning to deploy nuclear ICBMs to Cuba, Mexico, and Venezuela in response to NATO deploying nuclear weapons to Eastern Europe.
So it's not just
Wow.
Russia in Cuba, it's Russia in Cuba, Mexico, Venezuela. Now, Brother Jim, what do Cuba, Mexico, and Venezuela have in common? They're in the Western Hemisphere, are they
They
not?
sure are.
Now, wasn't there this thing called the Monroe Doctrine? What
There
happened?
was.
What happened to the Monroe Doctrine? It's kind of disappeared. The Monroe Doctrine is any foreign interests, particularly of an aggressive nature,
Mhm.
that take place in our hemisphere
Mhm.
suddenly become American interests. We want to know what in the world's going on.
Absolutely right.
You want to start moving into the Western Hemisphere in a hostile way. We as Americans are going to take note of it. Where is the Biden administration in any of these things? I mean, you hear almost nothing from them by way of a response.
He's taking a nap.
Yeah, probably. After he had his ice cream cone.
Yeah.
So, wow. What did Ezekiel predict? Russian expansionism in the last days. The prophecy made no sense in the days of Gesenius when he deciphered the prophecy for us as a Hebrew scholar.
Mhm.
But my goodness, does it make sense now?
Oh my goodness,
And
yes.
we're living, I would argue, in very clear messianic times.
Amen,
And
brother.
one other thing is happening, Brother Jim, as all of these other things are transpiring. This takes us to our fourth bullet point, and it has to do with globalism. Globalism is on the march. What
Yep.
does Daniel chapter 7, verse 23 predict?
Daniel 7:23. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it.
So when it makes reference there to the whole earth, it's talking about world government.
Mm-hmm.
And the ambition for global governance right now is almost on steroids.
Yeah.
A lot of people have been focused on the meeting in Geneva with the recent WHO, World Health Organization, and how they didn't quite cross the finish line with a kind of a globalist health treaty, which would put a transnational form of government into place over the independent sovereign states or independent sovereign governments. And so a lot of people think, oh, I guess we can take our eyes off globalism now.
Yeah.
No, think again. They're about ready to meet again,
Yeah,
the
they are.
globalists. And in this case, we're talking about the United Nations.
Mm-hmm.
And notice this particular picture. This comes from the United Nations website. It's called the Summit of the Future.
Mm.
And they are going to be meeting September 22nd and 23rd, 2024. They've called themselves the Summit of the Future. What are they all about? Multilateral solutions for a better tomorrow,
Yeah.
meaning we're against unilateralism.
Mm-hmm.
Independent countries acting on their own behalf
Can't
to
have
protect
that.
their own interests. We need a multilateral approach
Mm.
where there is some kind of overarching governmental structure that the independent nations of the earth have to acquiesce to
Mm.
before they can make any particular moves. Meaning, the people that are governing you are international bureaucrats that you don't vote for.
Yeah.
And so what all of this is it's a squelching of national sovereignty. And they're about ready to meet, Brother Jim, kind of coming off the WHO meeting. This is I don't know, same group of people, different costume on. I guess we could put it that way. And they have what's called a pact for the future.
Mm.
And you can actually go to the United Nations website and download this pact for the future, which is, I guess, an agenda items that they're going to be discussing
Yeah.
coming up, I believe in New York, September 22nd and 23rd, just a few months away from the time of this recording, 2024. And what, pray tell, is on the agenda for the meeting? Well, item number 5, if you download this Pact for the Future, item number 5 is, ready? Transforming global governance.
Drum roll, right?
So the whole agenda is global governance.
Right.
That's why we say global governance is right on track,
Mm-hmm.
in moving in the direction that Daniel said it would move in the last days. But can you read for us number 45 under section 5 of this Pact for the Future, dealing with the meeting agenda items that are under discussion and will be voted on from the United Nations in New York, September, what did we say, 22nd through the 24th.
All right, this is item 45. Today, our multilateral system, constructed in the aftermath of the Second World War, is under unprecedented strain.
Stop. That's the American century.
It sure is.
Throw it out. It's under strain.
Yes.
So what do they want to replace it with?
It has had remarkable achievements in the past 80 years, but we are not complacent about the future of our international order, and we know it cannot stand still. Without fundamental changes to our multilateral institutions, a recognition of the need for greater international cooperation, and an unwavering commitment to the Charter and international law, global challenges could overwhelm and threaten all of humanity. Without a transformation in global governance, the positive progress we have seen across all 3 pillars of the United Nations work in recent decades could unravel. We will not allow this to happen. And then
then we have a couple of action items, action 36, action 41. Before you read those, what they're saying here under number 45 through this Pact for the Future is that our problems are global and nations of the earth can't fix those problems. So we need, basically, it's what the heading says.
Yeah.
We need a one world government.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
is it any surprise, Brother Jim, that in light of all of these other prophecies we've been talking about, this trend of globalism would be front and center? It's all these things happening simultaneously, concurrently.
Yes, yes.
So continue, please.
And it just seems like people are asleep,
They
right?
sure are.
They don't see the handwriting on the wall, as we say. Action 36. We commit to transforming global governance and reinvigorating the multilateral system to tackle the challenges and seize the opportunities of today and tomorrow. And action item 41. We will reform and strengthen the United Nations.
Not we might, but we will. Multilateralism out, or in, I should say, unilateralism, global governance out. I remember when
Wow.
I'm thinking back to the first Bush administration back in the early 90s, where he used the expression New World Order.
He did.
And there was such an outcry against it that he never used the expression again. You know, it's like back then they were trying to hide the concept of New World Order. Now they just put it out in the internet and put it into their agenda item, you know, for the next globalist meeting. So the globalists apparently are on the precipice of crossing the finish line. And it's kind of interesting that the closer they get to the finish line, the more transparent they get about their motivations. They don't have much to hide.
Yeah, they're not trying to hide it.
Yeah, and there is no vacation in globalism from their momentary letdown in Geneva. It's about to resurface in New York in September. And part of it that's a little bit scary to think about is some recent elections have moved things to the right. There have just been some recent elections in Europe which favor the right, not the left.
Surprising.
If you look at Trump's numbers, poll-wise, Trump, you know, being a nationalist and not a globalist, and if you look at his poll numbers, it looks like he's poised to do pretty well, you know, in the next election cycle. So you kind of get the impression that they want to put some kind of structure into place before Trump takes office, if he wins at all.
Yeah.
And I think in the next few months, the globalists sense this trend. They saw it in Europe. They see it in the United States. They're nervous, and they're going to do something more overt, you know, more out in the open, you know, shall we say. It's kind of like what the first Trump presidency did. You know, Trump wasn't supposed to win. Hillary was supposed to win. And when Trump got in, you really saw their true agenda and their hatred come out, and they're reacting against the desire on the part of people to be nationalists rather than globalists. So I think the next few months are going to be very interesting because you want to talk about a globalist, you know, grab the globe mentality. That is something that looks like it's in the works for mid to late September. In other words, the United Nations, they want teeth. They want teeth.
Yeah.
And they want power. And it looks like they're going to start grabbing power. Now, this globalist grab bag is nowhere better illustrated than the International Criminal Court. We have a couple of articles on that.
What a misnomer.
And because we are out of time, we're going to pick it up right there for next week. But in the meantime, I want to make people aware of the Youth Bible Conference. This is put on by DM2, covering the book of James here at Sugarland Bible Church, June 24th through 28th, 2024, brought to you by DM2. And basically, it's an intensive Bible teaching through the book of James.
Awesome.
Probably one of the most misunderstood books,
that's right.
in the entire Bible. And that conference, if you want to come to it, it's for youth, but really adults would enjoy it just as much because they teach at a very intense level. We need you to sign up if you want to come on the SLBC homepage.
Yes.
And there's actually a QR code. Is that a QR code or a QRL code? QR code, where you can access information about that conference and sign up. It will be live streamed, and it will be archived, and there are conference booklets available. And if you are watching online and you want a conference booklet, I've been told to call the SLBC office, and we can set you up with a conference booklet. So that conference is imminent, and I wanted to make mention of it. And so it's coming up just in a couple of days, Monday through Friday, June the 24th through the 28th, 2024, a youth conference on the book of James put on by DM2, hosted right here at Sugarland Bible Church. So we've covered, Brother Jim, a lot of ground here.
Indeed, we have.
We've covered a little bit of globalism. We're going to say more about it next week. The Gog Magog invasion and alignment. We've covered information about the world against Israel, and we've covered information about anti-Semitism. So at this point, we're going to close off, and we'll see you next week, Lord willing, on Pastor's Point of View. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. God bless you.
God bless.